In this next demonstration of smoke, we're going to be focusing on the action tool, the 3D compositing tool that is available within inside of smoke. And we're going to look at the 3D visual effect capabilities in smoke, which add new depth to your creativity. So on my desktop, you can see that I have several different clips, different files that we're going to be incorporating into our action environment. So let me go and step into action. And you can see now Action has a wide variety of different tools that you can use and implement in your 3D environment. If I go to my Media tab, you can see in my Media list here we have nothing because we've not imported anything. So let's do that now. I'll choose the New Media button, go back to the desktop, and I'll bring in this large still image of a cloud. I like bringing this file in first to really emphasize the fact that in Action I can work with any size files. It doesn't have to be all matching the same resolution and so on. I can bring in all these different elements and combine them together. Also, if I switch to a 2-view layout, you can see that over on my left-hand side is my schematic, and every layer that I bring in will have an axis that's applied to it. This allows me to come in here and rotate, manipulate, scale, and make any type of transformation to the footage that I want. Also, I'll point out that we have a node for our camera. Notice the workflow in Action. As I select something such as the axis for this layer, my parameters change in the bottom to give me the tools relevant to that selected object. I select the camera, you see the camera parameters are now displayed for me. Also, it's important to understand that Action is a true 3D environment. So to really emphasize that, I'll set my view on the left side to be a top view. And you'll see there's my camera, and again I can manipulate and animate my camera just like I would a real camera in the real world. But here's the layer that we just imported, and by default it comes in as a flat surface. But understand that whatever you import into Action becomes a 3D object. What I mean by that is this flat layer on the surface controls for it, I can tell it not to be a flat object, but to be a bicubic. Now, in my player, you can see I can manipulate and bend the footage around inside 3D space. Let me undo that a couple times. What I want to do is region select these handles and just drag back and create this environment that we're going to build our composite in. I'll also take this footage, push it back in Z, and maybe scale it up a little bit to fit the frame. So you can see now I have that footage bent and far away from the camera. Let me go back to our schematic view and let's start bringing in some more elements. So again, I go out to the desktop and I'll bring in the footage of the Colosseum. Looking at the media list here, as I mentioned earlier, notice that I am just stacking up the different layers as I'm importing them. I also have the ability, if I tap down, to access what's called the priority editor, where I can control the hierarchy of my different layers inside of Action. Going back to the Media tab, notice that there are individual tools that I can apply to each one of the media sources that I'm bringing in, such as a keyer, color correction, either at the RGB and the matte, blurring, shadows, Gaussian blurs, and so on. In this case, what I want to do is just take this footage and bring it back in Z space to fit the frame and maybe make an adjustment to my Y position. Now I'll go back to the desktop and bring in some of the green screen footage. So you'll see that the green screen footage is brought in, and by default the Luma key is being pulled. I don't want to use the Luma key. What I want to use is the master key to pull a chroma key. So to do this, we can go to where you have the K for keying and just double click on this area for this media layer. Now I step into the keying tools. Notice that I have several different keying tools available to me. I'll use the master key. So I just want to click and start to pull the key. If we look at the matte, you can see that we still have some work to do. And one of the many things that I love about the master keyer is how intuitive it is. If I hold a hotkey and move around inside my player, you'll notice that the master keyer is giving me suggestions as to what parameters it thinks I should adjust to correct and clean the key. Now, another editing and compositing package, very often what I would do with a key such as this is apply multiple keyers onto the same shot so that I can fine-tune and finesse the key without altering and changing the original key that I pulled. What's great about the master keyer is this ability is built right into it. Instead of sampling the matte, what we can do is switch and sample what's called a patch. Now when I click and drag in the player, you'll notice that I'm adding more transparency in this area and cleaning up the corruption within the matte without affecting the original matte that I pulled. Notice also that the patch reads black. The software was smart enough to know that I'm trying to eliminate pixels, so it created black within those patches. If I switch to a second patch and I click and drag in the area that I want to be opaque, notice that the software switches this patch to be white. Now I want to create a garbage mask, so I go to my masking tools and I click the add button, and I'll just click and create a garbage mask around the talent. I'll set some parameters, set it to be an outside, and I'll set my duration to be 45 frames. And now as I scrub through, I can see that the talent stays within the mask. So this is perfect. Let's go back into action by clicking the return button. I'll also set my duration to be 45 for this. Now as I scrub through, we have our talent properly keyed inside of the composite. Let's go get the last element that we want to import. So I choose New Media once again, and I'll bring this footage in. You'll see that there's a new axis that's applied for that, and also on the media list, there is the new layer that we just brought in. Now, since this footage was shot in the same studio, the same time, we don't want to have to redo everything that we did with the first key. What's great about the workflow in Smoke is I can simply select the key from the first media layer that we brought in, choose Copy, select the new layer, and choose Paste. I've now pasted that key onto this footage also. If I want to adjust or fine-tune it, I can step into the keyer once again, and here you can see that I can do some more work to this, such as adjusting in my histogram, and also if we go to our garbage mask, we want to make sure this talent stays within, which it doesn't right here, so I can just simply go and make an adjustment to the mask to compensate for the difference in the shot. Let's return back into action, and now I can use the axes for each one of these to position the talent where I want them to be in the frame. If I rotate my scene, you can see that we have all our elements now spaced out in 3D space within inside of the action environment. Now I want to add some lights into the scene, and I like to do this with my left view being a top view. The reason why I like doing that is because it really emphasizes the interactivity you have with your lights. So I'll take a light from my node bin, and I drag it into the top view, and you can see over in the player just how interactive this is as I move my light around in the 3D environment. So I can position my light in the upper left corner, and now I want to go and add shadows to this. So I can go to my lighting tab and double click on the shadow cast, and now you'll see that we have realistic shadows being cast from this light. Now there is an issue though. I really don't want to have the shadows being cast onto this cloud footage in the background. So let me switch my view on the left side to be a schematic view once again. Now before I get into that, let me first click on our shadow cast tool to access its parameters. You can see all the different parameters we have for our shadows. This is the workflow that I was talking about earlier. Whatever I select over here in my schematic, notice the tools and the parameters that are relevant to that particular object that I'm selecting are displayed for me. So example, with this image of my cloud selected, you'll see that we have shadow casting parameters over here with the surface parameters. And by default, every layer is going to cast and receive shadows. But what's great about this is I can expand this flyout, and I can control what layer is going to receive shadows, cast shadows, and so on. Or I can just turn it off altogether. Now this layer will not cast shadows or receive shadows. Select the shadow cast node once again, and now I can add some softness to my shadows. I can introduce some transparency and really finesse and fine tune the shadow effect being cast by this light. Now let's add another light into our scene. So I go back over to my node bin, and I'll drag this light into the scene. Now I don't want to use this light as an actual light. I want to use it to create a lens flare. But before I do that, notice how the new light is interacting and affecting the existing shadows from the original light just like it would in the real world. So as I said, I want to have a lens flare generated off of this light. So I come back down to my lighting tools and just double click the lens flare node to add the default lens flare. Now you can see we have our lens flare added into our composite. Looking over in the schematic, you can see all the different elements that make up this lens flare. This is a totally procedural lens flare. What I mean by that is if I start double clicking on any of the elements that make up this lens flare, you'll see just how much control I have over each individual part. For example, I've double clicked on the ring, so I now receive all the rings parameters. And there's several different sub-menus relevant to each part of this lens flare. If I want to adjust the rotation of this, I could. If I want to keyframe this, I could. There's all these different parameters, as I said, that you can control independently of every element of the lens flare. You can even change the image as to what is being used as the ring. You can put your company's logo in there if you wanted to. The other thing that's very important to understand is that this is a true 3D lens flare. This is not some 2D flat plugin that is being added on top of my 3D environment. It is true 3D. Also, it will respect the alpha information of your layers and any 3D geometry. So for example, if I start dragging my light back in Z space, at one point it's going to just disappear. And what's happened is it's actually gone behind this layer of the Colosseum. Watch what happens as I drag the light and the lens flare over to where there's transparency, and it reappears and disappears once again as it goes behind the Colosseum building. With this light selected, let's do one more thing. Let's take this one step further. I'll add a raise to this also, and now you'll see another node, the raise node, has been added into my light also. If we go to the raise parameters, you can see I can start to adjust the spread and create the God rays, and these also respect the alpha information and any 3D objects that you would have within inside of your 3D composite. You have extreme amount of control over the rays, such as the intensity. You have the object rays intensity, which now takes on color information based on the layers the rays are going through. You also have parameters such as shimmering. By activating, I now access the parameters that I can adjust for this. You can keyframe and animate it over time. So these are just some of the tools available inside the action environment when I was talking about the 3D visual effect capabilities you have in Smoke, which now allow you to take your creativity to a whole nother level using these tools.